Tenants and advocates in Tennessee are upset about a new law which requires that tenants come up with a year's worth of rent in order to appeal an eviction. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have some interesting news out of the state of Tennessee, and it's about a new law that they just passed there which requires that if a tenant wants to appeal an eviction ruling, they have to come up with a year's worth of rent. Okay, now this sounds like a good thing to me. I threw a post about this on my community channel a few days back, and there was overwhelming support for it. And landlords from a lot of other states were like, hey, why can't we do that here as well? Because here's the thing, right? When you get these tenants in place, there's a lot of them, they know how to scam the system. They know how to, keep the ball rolling so that they don't actually get evicted from their property. And they do that by filing useless motions and appeals and keeping it, keep on filing different stuff and, change of address and, I got to get a new attorney and etc. On and on and on. And the landlord doesn't get paid. The landlord has to come out of pocket for all of the legal fees. Meanwhile, a lot of the cities, etc., are paying for the tenants' legal fees. That's another story. But in the end, it hurts the landlords a lot. So, hey, maybe the tenant should have to be able to financially suffer some sort of a burden as well if they want to file this appeal. Okay, if this appeal is the real thing, then they would have no problem doing that. But, if it's just a bunch of BS, then, hey, guess what? You better come up. You better just get on out of that property, okay? So, yeah, I agree with this law. I'm glad to hear about it, and I'm not surprised that they're upset about it. They're upset about anything that happens to favor property owners and landlords over tenants, They always look to landlords like, hey, these are evil people. They're these evil rich guys. Well, that's a complete joke, okay? And as I've said before, the majority of landlords own one, maybe two properties. Most of them just own one. But since the majority of landlords only own a couple of properties, that means that if the tenant is screwing them over with a bunch of legal fees, etc., then a lot of them don't have the money to cover it. A lot of them are truly struggling. A lot of them are just normal people who are just trying to get by. And they thought, hey, this rental property is going to be my retirement. And they got screwed over by a crappy tenant. That's why people are getting out of the rental business. That's why they're selling their rental properties to owner occupants. That's why the big landlords are converting the apartments over to condos, because it just isn't worth it to deal with all of the nonsense. But, at least the state of Tennessee, it's a landlord-friendly place. There's a lot of landlord-friendly places out there. And I encourage the people who live on the coasts, who live in these more progressive places and are landlords, I encourage you to look in places like Tennessee or the Midwest, the South. These are places where landlords still have their property rights. They haven't taken them away yet. Okay? So you can still make a profit, you can still run your business as a business, and you aren't expected to fall under all these socialist policies. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think of this new law up in Tennessee that requires tenants to pay a full year worth, or have a full year worth of rent ready if they want to appeal a eviction. Do you think this is a fair law or an unfair law? Do you think this is good for landlords, or do you think it's bad for landlords? Okay, I mean, what do you think? I'm just curious. So this article is coming from newschannel5.com, and it says, new Tennessee eviction appeal law could cause hardship for low-income renters, advocates say. Well, yeah, it could cause a hardship for low-income renters. But if these people were already in eviction court, it's likely that they haven't paid rent. The majority of people in eviction cases are there for non-payment of rent. So if this is going to cause a hardship, well, then, maybe they should have just paid their rent on time. But anyway, let's see what this article says about the topic. A new Tennessee state law requires renters to come up with a year's worth of rent to appeal an eviction. The idea is to protect landlords from being hurt financially due to court proceedings. Governor Bill Lee signed it into law on April 8th, so it applies to current cases. However, some wonder if the law will be challenged. Okay, so yeah, they just signed this into law, brand new bill. You know, it's a good thing in my opinion, right? And I just want, I want the same thing as what the article says. They said they believe that a lot of landlords are being hurt financially by them filing all these appeals, all this stuff, right? It's the same thing. It's my same argument against them providing attorneys to tenants for free. Basically, these tenant-provided attorneys, they file just a ton of stuff while landlords are paying thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket for a private attorney. Now, I always thought that a landlord-tenant relationship was a civil issue. So why is the government taking sides in a civil case? Okay, it doesn't make any sense. The government shouldn't be taking sides, yet they are by providing an attorney only to the tenants. If they're going to provide attorneys, they need to provide them to everybody. Otherwise, it's just unfair and it should be illegal. But, in terms of this law, yeah, landlords are going to suffer financially the more appeals that are filed, and, it's just not right. So they put this law in place to help prevent that. So it has to be a true, God's honest, rightful appeal if they want to. So at their Madison home, Patricia Copeland and her sister can't afford a rent hike while on a fixed income. Their landlord took them to court, and they were told to get out in 10 days. That's the law, according to Legal Aid Society's Zach Oswald. I think what we're looking at here is situations where potentially the landlord didn't have the right to evict. The tenant had defense, where the person who was evicted, the tenant, isn't even the owner of the property, isn't even the landlord, isn't even the property manager, but they went ahead and they got their judgment in 30 seconds in General Sessions Court, Oswald said. Yeah, I got no clue what this guy is talking about. Trying to create this straw man argument of why this is happening. I'm not even wasting my time with that, right? All I know is that if the tenant couldn't afford the rent at the place, right, and their lease was over, then they need to move on. They need to go somewhere where they can afford. Now, that's not a rightful argument. Well, we're living here. They rose the rent, and now we can't afford it. So we're just not. No. You can move along, and the landlord can get somebody in there who can afford it. Okay? You can go somewhere that you can afford. The landlord has no right to make sure that you have low rent forever. The landlord, shouldn't be forced to keep you in there as long as you want to stay. Okay, we have contracts in place for a reason. There's a reason that landlords fill out these leases, because simply put, those are the terms that we agree to when you move in. And if that lease ends after 12 months and then the landlord needs to raise the rent in order to pay the bills because of all the inflation, then so be it. But that doesn't mean that you have more rights to the landlord's property than he does. That's completely ridiculous. And at least not in the state of Tennessee, or not here where I invest. Maybe in California or New York, that's the case, but not here. Okay. So yeah, you need to move on. If they wanted to appeal their eviction, the new law would require Copeland to come up with 1 year's worth of rent. How is it going to affect low-income people? How is it going to affect people of color? People that we know who have less representation, Oswald said. So there are potential fair housing issues here. There are potential equal protection issues here that may be looked at in the future. How is it going to affect low-income people or people of color? It's going to affect them the exact same way it would affect high-income people or people who are, not people of color. If they don't pay their rent and they are in eviction court, everyone will be affected the exact same way by this law. It doesn't target any specific groups. And that is just a ridiculous argument, okay? I hate arguments like that, because I'm like, hey, come on here. What does this have to do with people of color or whatever? There's plenty of low-income people who pay their rent on time every single month. There's plenty of people of color who pay their rent on time every single month. And you making excuses or using that argument is actually insulting to people of color. So shut up with that garbage, okay? And I've said that many times in my videos. It just annoys me when they use that argument, okay? Let's look at this from the perspective of the individual. Everyone has a personal responsibility to pay their debts, the debts that they owe, and fulfill the obligations of the contracts that they signed, regardless of their race or whatever, okay? You do not get an excuse just because of your ethnicity or your race or your religion or your sex or your income status, okay? If you sign that contract, you need to pay your bills. Okay, so yeah, this is a good law for landlords, and I'm not going to read the rest of this article, but you get the gist of it, okay? And let's hope that it doesn't get thrown out.